This evening we are going to be looking at the topic of communication and how important it is within the home, within a family, to have that communication, to have that connection as we're able to visit with each other and communicate our needs and our desires, our concerns. Last week I did get to watch a part of Kevin Rhodes on the internet, the YouTube, and 7 points. I thought Kevin Rhodes had 7 points. I'll go 12. Hey, come back in here. So don't go out. Oh, no, he did a fantastic job. And as Robert said, the bar has been set high. But as we look, the glory of God, able to encourage each other, be able to find some things that we can learn from and we can benefit together. And so thankful as we're able to be together this evening. Just kind of a little bit about a lot of the material that I've put together. My aunt, her name is Gwendolyn Webb. She wrote the book, Training Up a Child. I believe there's a couple of copies in the church library here. I used a good portion of her chapter on communicating with children and the family to build a part of my lesson. And then also, Brandon, you remember the guy did communication there at Focal Point? I took real good notes there too. So it's not all my own material, but a lot of things you come to think about. How are we going to communicate? How are we going to be able to visit with each other and help people understand what we're saying? You remember it was Paul as he wrote to the church in Corinth, and they were having a difficulty with speaking in tongues. And the problem with speaking in tongues, that someone would be speaking in a tongue and people would not understand. And you recall there in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, Paul said, I'd rather speak 5 words with, and what is the word? With understanding, with what people can understand, than 1,000 words in a tongue. It's important for people to be able to understand. And so as we're looking this evening, the importance of communicating in such a way that we can understand each other. And we all come from very different backgrounds, don't we? There's a lot of different personalities. There's some that, I guess you've heard the word, the gift of gab. They can carry on a conversation with a fence post. And then there's others that, their preference would be in a nice, quiet, solitude place with nobody around them and just maybe reading a book. We're all different, aren't we? But when it comes time to communicate within the home, there's sometimes that we're going to have to put aside some of those things and who we are, and to be able to open up and converse with people. Now, as we'll be talking about this communication, we're going to be looking at communication that parents would have with their children, parents would have, spouses would have as they communicate together. But as we look at many of these points, it's going to be things that will apply to all of our life as we communicate with the person that checks us out at whatever grocery store we might be at. Communication and things we can grow, we can learn in, knowing that it's a two-way street, both a listener and a speaker, both doing that, being able to communicate. Now, when we were young, you remember how well we communicated? Oh, it was great, wasn't it? You'd begin your sentence, and that one you loved would finish it for you, right? You could communicate like nobody's business. As you got a little bit older, the family began to grow. Maybe communication wasn't so good, but you still had a smile on your face, especially for a camera. Anybody have a family that looked a lot like that? That was my family, the hair and everything. But as time goes by, after about 13 children, mom's not smiling anymore. Dad's got a grin. But life changes, doesn't it? But the object is when we grow old, when we've come to another stage in our life, or whatever stage in our life, we can with a smile, we can with joy, look back on those times and say, it has been good. We had a relationship that we can say, there was love there. There is a measure of being able to relate and to care for each other, and it's brought us through so many things in this life. As we can read in Proverbs, chapter number 25, verse 11, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. When things that are said in a proper way, in a good way, can be a very, very good thing. In James chapter 1, verses 19 and following, find, so then, my beloved brethren, let us be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. It's important, and we begin thinking about communication. We've got to slow down, stop, take the time to listen. And to speak, be thoughtful before we open the mouth and things come rolling out. But all that tied together, you've got to be slow to anger. Recognizing to control the emotions and the tempers that may flare up as we are trying to develop that relationship with each other. So important that we control that as we consider that relationship we have. As we look, point number one, so important as we look at community. And by the way, I do have 12 points. They'll probably go more quickly than Kevin Rhodes did, so we'll see how it turns out. But point number one, listen. Have 2 ears to hear and 1 mouth to talk with. Listen. Listen. Well, I heard you, but did you listen to them? I hear my wife lots of times. But then she said, Doyle, did you listen to me? Did you hear what I said? Let me try. Let me think if I can. But to truly, it's not just hearing. It's a matter of taking the time to listen and thinking. Hearing is one of 5 senses, but listening is an art. To take that time to develop that sense of listening. How many times have we misunderstood a situation because simply we haven't listened to understand? Maybe while talking, when someone's talking, our mind goes on to something else. Ever been in a situation where you're visiting with someone, spouse or child, whatever it might be, here, whoever it might be, and as they're talking, all of a sudden you see in their eyes this far away look. Whether they're thinking of their vacation somewhere on the beach, or whether they're thinking of what they're going to say next, they're no longer listening. The importance for us to listen. I remember when our son Benjamin was a little boy. He's a sharp little critter. He had lots of things in his mind, but he was very, very quiet. Those who remember him, he was quiet. And there was different ones in the congregation here that would say, Benjamin, what about such and such? And Benjamin, you could see the little wheels turning. But before he could answer, they went on to answer it for them. But here they were, they simply weren't listening. Take the time to listen to our children. Because sometimes when you ask them something or they begin to communicate, we need to be quiet and let them speak and talk. Listen to them. Take the time to listen. Practice your listening skills. There's a little lady there in Lufkin, Texas, and she's had a stroke. She speaks very thoughtfully, and so many people, they just can't visit with her. Now, she has some things to say. If I give her some time, and it may be 3 or 4 minutes, she'll get her thoughts out. What I do is I stop, nothing else around, and I simply look. Yes, yes. And listen. Focus and listen. Beginning of communication, we've got to listen. A big part of this communication as well is going to be our body language. And we've, as I mentioned before, stop and listen and look, making eye contact. It's important as you're visiting with someone that you put down the paper. You put those things that are going to be distractive away. The TV, turn the TV off. Young people, when your parents need to visit with you, turn the game off. And I'm not sure, it used to be Nintendo. I don't think Nintendo's a thing anymore, is it? No, that was back a few years ago. Put them away and focus and use the body language that you can communicate with us. Young people, when you're visiting with them, I've always appreciated a young person when you're talking to them who will look you in your eyes. Look people in their eyes. That body language showing them that you are listening and that you're paying attention. And as we're talking about this concept of body language, our posture is so very important. I remember visiting with someone one time, and they came in my office. They had a chip on the shoulder, right? They had something that they really wanted. Sat down in the office, crossed his arms, and kicked his feet up there, and just said, "Now this is the way it's going to be." Some of you may remember him. Body language. It speaks a whole lot louder than our voices do. Be careful when we're visiting with someone that, one, it's not like this, or like this, or like this, but give them your attention. Listen to them with all of your body, as we consider those things. Listen to them and strive to understand. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse number 7. Peter, he is encouraging specifically husbands. We read, "Husbands likewise dwell with them," talking about your wife, "dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered." We realize that this is something that can keep our prayers from being effective when we do not listen, specifically the husbands listening and trying to understand their wives. A wife who is a fellow heir, one who is on the same relationship with God, and important for us to understand and listen to them. Body language, so important as we communicate. I was probably in college before I learned this little trick. When a girl would write on a piece of paper down at the bottom a little note, XO, XO, XO. And I really didn't know what that meant for a long time. Anybody know what this, does it still mean what it used to mean? Hugs, O's, X's, kisses. I was kind of embarrassed when I first saw that little note. But no, it's what it takes for us to communicate, to have that contact, the sharing, personal sharing with each other. So important to show endearment to each other. How many have I given a hug as we've come into this building? And I may not got you a hug yet. I'm still getting a hug, right, before you get away. It's important for us, and this is a part of our communication, using our bodies, using our physical bodies to communicate with each other. Being open. Being ones who I want to be with you. If you're around someone who doesn't want to be around you, it becomes very apparent. We should want to be with our spouses, with our husbands and wives, with our children, with our Christian family. Let them see that and let them know that. It's said scientifically, a husband and a wife. A wife needs, I believe this was in the lesson that we heard there in Focal Point, needs to have 8 non-sexual touches every day. 8. I go back there, but run off the camera. I'm right at 7 right now. I need one more of my wife, so I'll be taken care of, right? No, it's not keeping count, but there's that importance that there's a touching and showing endearment to each other. Kind of like, Bill, what you're doing right now to Betty with your arm around her back. That's a part of communication. That's a part of showing that you are important to me, that you're dear to me. You know, we're riding in the car. We travel around. We travel a lot. We'll be going along, and I'll just reach over and I'll tap my wife on the knee. She knows exactly what I'm going to say next. You know why? I've said it hundreds and hundreds of times after I tap her on the knee. And it's not turn up the air conditioner. It's not give me another drink of water. I love you. I love you. Have to be careful sometimes. I'll tap her on the knee and I'll keep going and, oh yeah, I love you. I got to finish that sentence, don't I? Body language, where we show each other that love. Number 3, and the slide shows it's going to be very simple, in that we have to keep our communication simple. Something doesn't need to be complex to be understood. Use simple word responses. A a wife that can go on and on and on and on, and the husband simply grunts. That's not communication. Keeping it simple doesn't mean just give a grunt whenever you're happy or whenever you want something, but keeping it simple that you don't go on and on. It has to be complex. I have a problem with this sometimes because I'm going to build or construct something. And I go to my wife and say, now I'm going to do this, and this is going to go here, and this is going to go here, and this is going to go here. And a little bit I look over and she's going, very good, honey. I have no idea what you're saying. Oh, you're going to build a shelf. Oh, it'd have been just as well if I said, I'm going to build a shelf. Not to describe all the ways I'm going to, but keeping it simple. Keep communication simple so it can be understood. Instructions for our children. As we're just trying to communicate with our children, keep it simple. I remember as our children were growing up, they're in the bathroom. Before they could read, my wife had cleaning instructions. It was very simple. There's a little picture. Here's the toilet, and here's a brush. And the picture was swish, 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 flush. Keeping it simple. You have a chore to do. You're going to be a part of it. But keep it simple so it can be understood. As we speak with our children, we want to encourage them to speak to us and to communicate with us. Speak with them with enthusiasm that you're interested in what they're saying. And you say, that's really neat. Tell me more. See, keeping it simple, communicating with them, great to help encourage them to have that communication. So they'll give us what we expect of each other. And to keep it simple and keep it where it can be understood. And how many times, of course, this kind of tells a little bit about me. I got lots of spankings. And as I was growing up, my daddy, by the way, this is one of his ties. My daddy would give a lecture before he wore us out. I don't remember a whole lot about those lectures. I just remember I was about to get a spanking. But we can go on and on and on and on. Of course, I think that might have been part of the torture that my dad had in mind for me, so to kind of drag it out a little bit. But keeping it simple, keeping it where it can be understood. As we communicate with our families, yes and no. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. Especially when you're looking at instruction. It's so important as we look at this communication. As parents, we're on the same page. We're both in agreement what is a yes, something that can be done, and what is a no, what should not be done. Communicating with each other. And so that the children know the rules. Chaos. Ever seen a family that was chaotic or living in chaos? They didn't know yes and they didn't know no. So let the yes be yes and no be no. Our children should, but it shouldn't be where our little children, that's the first word they learn, which sometimes it is, isn't it? A little child learning no. But when we do say no, we've got to mean it. A few simple rules. Number one, don't always say no. It could be yes, and it might be not now, but maybe later. So don't let no always be no. Rule number two is you're not overusing it, especially with those little ones. And as I mentioned before, sometimes that's the first word they know is no. Rule number three, say no to what really needs to be no and mean it. And there's some things in this life that must and always should be no. That is not acceptable. But as you have no's, also have yeses and mean those things. In Matthew chapter 5, 33 through 37, you recall as Jesus speaking there, he says, again you've heard it said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. In other words, you're to do what you say you're going to do. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, it is the great city of the King. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. So careful what you say, but let your yes be yes, and your no be no, for whatever is more than these is from where? It's from the evil one. Keeping it Yes, keeping it no. And let our families, let our children especially know what no means and abiding by that. Number 5, take the time it takes so it takes less time. That's a rule that I learned as I was training a mule. You take the time it takes so it takes less time. You spend the time that you need to do so you can accomplish the task. Because if you don't you don't communicate in the first place, you'll have to go back again and again and again. So be patient. Effective communication takes effort. It takes time. It takes spending time together with a husband and wife, visiting with each other and communicating. And in the world we live in, it's difficult, is it not? We're going 100 miles an hour. We've got ball games to go to. We have this going on, this going on, and we're running all kinds of places. But you've got to take the time to communicate as a family. Spend time together communicating with each other, with your spouse. And not just when it's convenient. Sometimes you have to make time when it's not really convenient, but communicate. I myself, I'm an early morning person. I don't need caffeine to wake up. I'm up and going, great day, early in the morning. At night, though, my brain doesn't always function as well. My wife knows that. If there's something that is going to be important to cover, she's going to wait if I'm tired. Be aware of it, but then take the time it takes to cover that material and keeping it where we can understand each other. And we should always be available. Available to your spouse, where you're ready to listen to them. And sometimes I said it's not easy, but making yourself available. We think God is always available. Time that in this life that there's struggles or there's things that we need help from or about. Can any and always, anytime and all the time, go to God in prayer. He's always available. Colossians 2, verse 4, continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving. Taking the time to listen when our children are young, showing that you really want to hear what they have to say, so when they do grow older, they will listen to you. Advice. Mealtime. I know some people don't really have time that they sit down for meals. There's some families that they just go and, they graze. It's good to have a time that you sit down together as a family, and mealtime is a great time to do just that. Taking the time. And take time to visit during mealtime. Turn off the TV. Put things aside. Look at each other. Second. I think I'm getting a text. Okay. Just one moment. Oh, they'll answer back in just a second. I'll finish this conversation in just a minute. I'll get back with you, right? You ever see that? You do, don't you? Now, as we go through, these little things, they're really handy. They really are. You can't run and hide with this thing. But too often, they're a hindrance in our communication. My wife, she used to open the back door and say, "Honey, breakfast is ready." She hasn't hollered at me out the back door in a long time. It's, "Oh, breakfast is ready. I better go eat breakfast." It can be handy, can't it? But it can be a hindrance. It can be where we're hiding behind that little monitor. Mealtime, make a time where I'm visiting and we're putting the smart device away. We're looking each other in the eye. We're communicating. By the way, it's okay if they get excited to talk with a little bit of food in your mouth as long as you cover it up so you don't spit on anybody. So mealtime, go ahead and talk. It's important to talk. Another time, and this is a time that I wouldn't have given up anything as my children were growing up, and that's bedtime. Bedtime, to sit there on the side of the bed as we reflect upon the day. And when Benjamin was little, I would say prayers with Benjamin, Sarah with Deborah, and we would say our prayers, and we'd talk about the day. We would read a little bit of the Bible and reflect upon life in general. It's a great time to communicate. Oh, by the way, I just got another text. Now, that was a real one, wasn't it? Oh, these things. Okay, sorry. It's going to ring next, wasn't it? So take the time. I thought my wife was doing that to me at first. to spend time and listen. Meal times and bedtimes are fantastic opportunities to do just that. This really doesn't need to be a point, does it? To speak the truth. Sadly enough, it is. Sadly enough, that as we look at the world around us, and can you know if what you're being told is even halfway true? But as we communicate with each other as a family, as we're looking at each other and eye to eye, be open and honest with each other. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15. But speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into Him who's the head, Christ. Speak the truth. And this would deal with whatever it be as we're speaking and teaching the truth about God's Word to the lost world around us. But as we're speaking the truth to each other, to our children, speak the truth in love. Remember a time, is before we had children. We were living in Amarillo. And a mother came over to visit us with her 2 little twin boys. Handful. Talk about handful, twin boys. That could be a handful, can't they? And came in, and we're sitting there in the living room. Of course, we didn't know much about kids ourselves, but we realized real quick that this was not the way to handle it. She didn't want the children to go to the back bedroom, which they didn't need to be back there. And she said, "Don't go to the bedroom. There's a big, bad dog back there. And if you wake that dog up, he'll be so mad." I looked at Sarah and said, "When did a dog move in? I don't remember a dog." She was lying to her children. We can't begin. If we begin doing that, then can they trust or believe anything that we say? We've got to be truthful. We must be consistent and not changing the rules, not changing the game, but being truthful and not saying one thing one time and something else later. And don't we just hate it when people don't tell us the truth? It can be so aggravating that it becomes the point where, do I know that anything that they're saying is true? As we're visiting with our children, we see this oftentimes, don't we? Well, if you can go to Walmart, you can go anywhere and see this, can't you? Don't touch that. You touch that again, I'm going to take you out here, I'm going to give you a spanking. One more time, I'm going to count to 5. Sometimes I wonder if they can really count to 5. Tell them the truth. And then do what you say you're going to do. Tell them the truth. And there's a number of things under this category that I want to touch on. But a husband and wife, you've got to be truthful to each other. You remember, many of us do, growing up watching a television show entitled, I Love Lucy. You remember that? Was there a single episode that it wasn't about Lucy deceiving or doing something behind her husband's back? Now, it was funny at times, and we found a lot of humor in things. But when you try to play that out in real life scenario, you've got to be truthful. You've got to be honest and tell the truth with each other, and that would involve all parts of our life. And how many times have I helped people with finances and whose family who have not been truthful? Call it financial infidelity, where the one goes and spends money that they didn't have, and the struggles that they were going on. We've got to be truthful, being considerate. And sadly enough, the ones that we love the most, we can hurt the most. We can say things that are most hurtful to the ones we truly love the most. We'll even use a different tone of voice with our family than what we'll use with other people. remember visiting with someone in a home setting. I'll just go as far as that. And here, Dad's talking really gruff. Phone rings. Hello. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, that would be great. Completely different tone of voice with the one on the phone than they had with the family. Going back, we've got to be truthful. We've got to be true to who we are. We have to consider, and if some of the things that we would say to our family, if we said it within the workplace, would you get fired? Would you lose your job? In Job chapter number 19, as Job reflects on his friends who'd come to visit. You remember Job as his friends were coming? Okay, Job, what did you wrong? What sin did you commit? And you remember Job in chapter 19, verses 1 and 2, as he answers them and says, how long will you torment my soul and break me in pieces with words? Our words can be very hurtful. They need to be true, be honest, but not hurtful. Point number 7. Timing is everything. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, we find, as Solomon describes, to everything there is a season, and for every time there's a purpose under heaven. It goes on to describe a time to be born, a time to die, time to plant, a time to harvest. You recall, there's a time for everything. As we communicate, our timing should be appropriate for the time that we're looking at. A husband and wife considering some major issues to discuss them. Timing is important. How about if we put it off and I'll visit with them next week about it? It's something that, we'll do that later. No, timing is important, that we approach these things. And as we approach these things that may be of a heavier, more consequences of the communication, and this is with husbands, wives, children as well, stop and take time to pray. Ask God for that help as you're communicating the situation that's here. But take the time. Be about that conversation. Don't put it off. Parents visiting with our younger children about procreation, where do babies come from? You better be ready if you haven't already, because the world out there will give a very skewed vision of it, but to look and be ready to present the truth. And don't wait until they're 10 or 12 years old, but approach those things. It's important looking at the timing. When they're little, emphasize to their little minds things that are right and things that are wrong. Growing up, our children are growing up, Texas Ranger fan, right? We're charged, and you watch it on TV and commercials. Commercial after commercial, there was, you want to have fun, you want to live the good life, you need to be drinking this particular beer. Our little boy growing up, he didn't know a whole lot of vocabulary, but he knew 2 words, bad beer. I told him as growing up, you see those commercials? Oh, that's bad. Beer is bad. The time we are, whatever time the situation is, we need to approach it and take the time it takes. Address these things. Timing is everything, so you can address those things so they can understand them. Understand statistically wise. By the time a child is 15 years old, they will have asked 500,000 questions. Now, I've known some kids, they ask 500,000 questions in one day. But as they ask questions, be open and ready to answer in a timely way, in an appropriate way, so that they can see and they can understand what needs to be understood. Speak softly. Something I discovered when we first got married, that my wife's family was very quiet. We'd go and visit, and my mother-in-law, she loved music and things, but the music was in a tolerable volume. You went home to my house, it was another story. Too often we live in a world where it's so loud. We need to have some peace, some quiet. Psalm 46, verse number 10. Be still and know that I am God. Be quiet and listen. Soft words, use soft words that are kind. Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath. Speak softly. Proverbs 25:15. By long forbearance is a ruler persuaded, and a gentle tongue breaks a bone. Can be effective in speaking softly to get someone's attention. You'll remember the movie. Go ahead, make my day. He didn't say it very loud, did he? Well, we had that vision of Clint Eastwood, right? You know, we can see it. And speaking softly can be much more effective than, what are you doing? And the yelling that can take place. Speak softly, communicate. Soft words that are appropriate, soft words that are positive, that are wholesome. And keyword, that are wholesome. Our words should be words that are pure words and not profanity, not negative. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Let no corrupt word proceed from your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Our words should be, as it says, unwholesome words. That's rotten or putrefied. The words that come from our mouth should be wholesome words. Words that will be helpful. Grew up on a farm. I'd go out in the back, taking care of the cows or pigs or whatever it was. I'd come into the house. You know what my mama would always tell us to do? Take your shoes off at the door. Why? She didn't want what was on our shoes to come into that house. We go into the world, at work, at school. Do you hear words that are unwholesome? We do, don't we? Don't let it be a part of your household. Those words, leave them at the door. Don't let them be a part of your household. Communication point number 9. Set the comfort level of your house. Be a thermostat and not a thermometer. Brother Brant Dickey, you still take care of the air conditioning in here? It could be a little bit cooler, couldn't it? I'm a little bit hot in here. And someone over here is going, I'm rather cold, aren't you? Aren't you kind of cold? It's hard to find that perfect temperature for everybody, right? But it could be that we all came in here, the air conditioner's not working at all here in August, and we'd all be pouring sweat, right? It's a little bit hot in here, what's wrong? Or it could be we come in and it's in January, there's ice on the streets, it's cold, and it's cold in here. Now, to make that comparison with our homes, do some of our homes, are they kind of hot, kind of heated? Or perhaps your home is kind of cold, kind of unfriendly. To have a home that the thermostat is set where there'll be comfort, where the family can feel good about the situation, the communication that goes on. My dad grew up in the Oklahoma Panhandle. I've been to the old farmhouse. He described as a young boy growing up, he'd wake up of a morning, a dust storm would go through, and there'd be the outline of his head on the pillow with dust all around. And it would be hot. He also described there'd be times he'd have his head on the pillow and there'd be a dusting of snow around. It'd be cold. But one thing I know about my grandmother, she was a thermostat in that house. She was loving. She kept the temperature within the hearts at the right temperature. I remember many times a little boy going to my grandmother's house, even when I got older too, and she'd be singing a gospel song. Set the temperature in your home. Be a thermostat where the comfort there is where your family will want to be there and enjoy being there. Communication. Remember, I have 12. I was honest, I have 12 points. Number 10, be wise. Think about the situation. In wise in the communication, When there's a problem, attack the problem and not the person. Too often we get, I'm kind of miffed at you, and I let them know, whether it be our child or whether it be our spouse or the child or the parent, let them know, I'm upset at you. Address the problem. Number 2, nagging is not communication. To complain and complain. Now, nagging, I heard amen, I think that was from a guy, right? But, sometimes us guys can nag too, can't we? I figure I'd hear amen from one of the ladies, right? But it's not communication. It's not going to get you anywhere. Now, don't bring up past problems. It's also known as being historical. We're going to look back in the history of things that's taken place, which you've done wrong, and we're historical about the situation. Don't bring up past problems. Don't be either historical nor hysterical, where we just can't control ourselves. There's a problem. Be wise as we look at the situation. Don't be sarcastic. There's some people that are really good at sarcasm. This is kind of just a natural thing for them. Don't be sarcastic. Approach a situation. We're going to approach it wisely with maturity. Don't be childish. Don't be using phrases like, well, you never, or you always, or I want. It becomes like a little child, doesn't it? Be mature. Be wise as we're describing the situations and that communication we need to have. Set the tone. And this being different, being the thermostat, this is more in the sense of to display the attitude or the direction of the communication that you would want to be had, that you'd want to see take place. Be an example of good communications. To raise your voice, and the other one to raise the voice a little bit, just a little bit higher than that. The other one just a little bit more than that, until there's all blown out volume control argument. Set the tone. Be the example the way that you would want the situation to be. Same way with our children. Communicate with them and be the example of what you would want them to be as they grow up. I remember a time, I was just a young guy, and there's someone who's disturbed at me, and they come to visit me. And you could tell in their voice that they were very disturbed at the situation that was developed and all the things going on. And I was about to get flamed, I could tell. And the way it was going to be, it could have been presented a way, and it was, that it worked out just fine. But I calmed the situation by doing this. It's back, they used to make these things called boom boxes. They had 2 big speakers, a thing called a cassette tape that goes in it. I pulled out my boom box, and I said, I want to be sure that we get all this. And I said, I'm going to record our conversation so we can be sure and understand it. It's a completely different meeting than what it would have been otherwise. As we're setting an example of how to communicate with others, imagine, am I visiting with someone? What if I knew there's a videotape being made of this conversation? How would it be different? Be an example of godliness and goodness as we communicate with each other. And our conversations will be so much better. As we communicate, husband and wife, the way we will be and the way we communicate, our children are going to learn from us. So be that example that we need to be, that will be appropriate, that will be right. And yes, I promised 12, and here's number 12. And very honestly, as I've looked at this assignment of communication, it's been difficult, because I have not been the best of communicator that I should have been. And I've failed to communicate many times. I've put my foot in my mouth many times. I have failed in a timely manner to address things. But be ready, and this is so important, to address difficult things. As we within a family or even within a church family, even at work, to address things that are not easy to approach and address. I say that I have failed. Many of you know my daughter Deborah. Many of you love my daughter Deborah. Several years ago, I've been seeing some signs that there's just something wasn't right with her spiritually. And I would say, Deborah, is something wrong? Oh, I'm fine. You get kind of defensive. And, okay, I didn't want to drive her away and that kind of thing. And in my own mind, I made several feeble attempts to try to justify, well, I just can't be judgmental to her. Well, as time goes on, now that she's off on her own, she's left the Lord's church. She's no longer faithful to God. And I think of times in the past that I should have addressed difficult things, and I didn't. As we're raising our children, as we're loving our children, there's times and things that aren't always easy. And it would be a lot easier if we just kind of ignore it and think, well, maybe it'll be okay. Maybe it'll get better. Address difficult things. Whether it be with our children whom we love and want so dearly better for them, or even with the husband and wife. And it may be something where you need more help than what you can handle within yourself. Go find help. Communication is so important that you will be able to express and look at things that are sometimes difficult. Because it means eternity. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse number 1, brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Communication is sometimes difficult. But the people that we love, people we want the best for, seek help, do those things that are difficult to make a difference in their lives. As we look at our life as we try to communicate. James chapter number 3 describes that communication in describing this little tongue. And this little tongue, as it's described, seeing that it's just a small little thing, but it can be so very powerful. It'll move a ship, a big ship, a little rudder will, much like that little tongue. It's like a little spark. It'll set a forest on fire, so like that little tongue. As we look at the importance of communication within our home, within our family, let's be all that God would have us to be, being about what God would want us to be as we love and we care for each other and grow together. God has communicated with us. God has made it very clear in His will what He would have for us is to become a child of God. To die to ourselves. To recognize that sin separates us from God and that the blood of Jesus is what will wash away our sins. And the way we come in contact with the blood of Jesus is that we're baptized into Christ. Have you obeyed the gospel? You can this evening. You can make your life right. But perhaps you've struggled and you haven't communicated, or you have communicated things that aren't right, and you've been hurtful, and you need some encouragement. You need the prayers of the church. This is an opportunity that you can make your life right. I encourage you to do that. Is there a song? Is that right? Let's stand while we sing this song.